Every morning for 2 years, 4-year-old Lily Osei climbed into her father's hospital bed and pressed her ear against his chest to listen to his heart. Not because anyone taught her to, not because a doctor asked her to, because she had decided, in the way that 4-year-olds decide things that adults later realize were the most important decisions ever made, that as long as she could hear it beating, everything was going to be okay. On the afternoon she stood in the Family Feud studio in Atlanta in her purple dress and her white shoes, Steve Harvey crouched down to her level and asked, the way he always asks children, what her favorite thing about her daddy was. Lily looked at him with perfectly steady eyes and said, without any hesitation, his heartbeat. Because it's still there. Steve Harvey stood up slowly. He took off his glasses. He rubbed his eyes. He walked 4 paces away from her and stood with his back to the audience for 9 seconds. And when he turned back around, he did not try to smile. He said, very quietly into the microphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, I need a moment." It was a Saturday in November 2018, and the Osei family had driven 9 hours from Cleveland, Ohio, to Atlanta, Georgia, in a minivan with one working back window and a check engine light that had been on since August. The family, Emmanuel Osei, 37, his wife, Abina, 35, Lily, 4, and Lily's grandmother, Ya, 67, had applied to Family Feud because Abina's sister had dared them to, laughing on a Sunday phone call, and because Emmanuel had laughed back and said, "Let's go," then, which was the most normal thing he had said in 2 years. Laughing like that. Saying, "Let's go." Acting like a man who had a plan. Emmanuel Osei had been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia 23 months earlier, 3 weeks before Lily's 2nd birthday. The diagnosis came on a Monday. The oncologist delivered it with the particular precision that doctors develop when they have said terrible things so many times that they have learned to say them efficiently, which is its own kind of mercy. Emmanuel had sat across the desk and nodded at each piece of information as if he were taking notes for later. He thanked the doctor. He drove to the grocery store. He bought Lily's favorite cereal and a bunch of bananas and a birthday card that had a purple elephant on it because Lily loved purple, and he drove home, and he put the groceries away, and then he went into the bathroom and ran the water in the sink so Abina wouldn't hear him, and he cried for 11 minutes. Then he stopped. He washed his face. He went back into the kitchen and started dinner. He did not tell Lily. She was 2. He told Abina, who had grown very still in the way that people who love each other grow still when they understand that the life they are currently living is about to become a different kind of life. They sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the children were asleep. Emmanuel held both of Abina's hands across the table. He said, "I'm going to fight it." She said, "I know." He said, "And I need you to keep everything as normal as possible for Lily." She said, "I know." He said, "I'm fine, Abina. I'm going to be fine." She squeezed his hands and did not say what she was thinking, which is the most loving thing a person can sometimes do. The treatment was aggressive and expensive, and partially, maddeningly incomplete in what the insurance would cover. The bone marrow transplant that Emmanuel's oncologist recommended in month 7 of treatment was classified as a second-line therapy option, and therefore not covered under their existing plan. The first appeal, filed in October 2017, was denied. The denial letter noted that the transplant was not indicated as a first-course treatment under standard protocol. Emmanuel's oncologist wrote a letter of medical necessity that used language like rapidly progressing and immediate risk. The second appeal was denied in December. The third appeal, filed with documentation from 2 additional oncologists and a specialist at Cleveland Clinic, was denied in February 2018 with a letter that used the phrase "not medically necessary at this time." a phrase that Emmanuel had taken to saying quietly to himself sometimes, as a kind of dark joke, when he needed to manage the anger. Not medically necessary, as if the necessity were a matter of opinion. He had taken out a second mortgage on the house in April 2018. He had accepted money from his brother in Toronto and his mother-in-law's savings in Accra, without looking either of them in the eye. He had sold the car with the working windows and bought the minivan, and he had told Abina it was better on gas, which was true, and he had not mentioned the other reason, which was that it was $9,000 cheaper. He had been honest with Abina about all of it, and dishonest with Lily about all of it, which was the agreement he had made with himself. Lily would know his heartbeat, and she would know his laugh, and she would know the Saturday morning pancake routine, and she would not know about the letters from the insurance company, or the second mortgage, or the phone calls to his brother at midnight. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But children know. Lily had started climbing into his hospital bed during his third round of inpatient treatment, when she was 2.5. Abina had brought her to visit, and Lily had simply climbed up, positioned herself against her father's side, pressed her ear to his chest, and gone to sleep. The nurse had come in and seen her there, and said quietly to Abina, "I've been doing this for 19 years, and I've never seen that." Emmanuel had been awake. His hand rested on Lily's back. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. By the time of the taping, Lily had been doing it every morning for almost 2 years. Emmanuel had learned to lie very still when she came in, so she could listen properly. It had become the first thing he thought of when he woke up. Not the hospital visits, not the insurance letters, not the second mortgage, but the weight of his daughter's ear against his chest, listening for the thing that told her everything was still okay. Nobody in that studio knew any of this. And that wasn't even the part that made everything stop. Steve Harvey came down from the stage before taping, the way he always does, moving through the families with handshakes and questions. He got to the Osai family, and he looked at Lily in her purple dress, and he crouched down. He said, "And what is your name?" She said, "Lily." He said, "Lily, that's a beautiful name. Now I have to ask you something very important." She looked at him. "What's your favorite thing about your daddy?" And Lily looked at Emmanuel, then back at Steve, and she said it, his heartbeat. Because it's still there. Steve Harvey stood up very slowly. He took off his glasses. He rubbed his eyes with the hand that was holding his glasses. He walked 4 paces away from her. His back was to the audience for 9 seconds. Nobody in the studio spoke. No one on the crew moved. Steve Harvey stood with his back to 300 people and 4 cameras, and he was very still. And then he turned back. He did not try to smile. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I need a moment." He looked at Lily, who was still looking at him with her clear, patient eyes. He said, "Sweetheart, can I tell you something?" She nodded. He said, "That is the most important answer anybody has ever given me on this stage." He looked up at Emmanuel. Emmanuel was looking at the floor. His jaw was set. His hands were at his sides. Steve said, "Sir?" "What's your name?" Emmanuel said, "Emmanuel." Steve said, "Emmanuel, I need to talk to you for a second. Man to man." He walked to where Emmanuel was standing, and he said, quietly enough for the microphone to barely catch it, "How bad is it?" Emmanuel looked at him. He said, "It's bad." Steve nodded. He said, "Okay. We're going to fix some of it today." Steve reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He called his personal physician, a doctor he had worked with for 15 years, live on stage. He said, "I need you to connect me to the best leukemia specialist in the country. Today, not this week. today, and I need you to arrange a review of this man's treatment plan." He listened. He said, "Yes. All of it. Everything the insurance won't cover, I'm covering personally." He looked at the producer who had stepped forward. He said, without turning, "Back up." The producer backed up. Steve was not done. He turned to the audience. Then to the camera, he said, "I want to say something to everybody watching. I was at my lowest point a long time ago. I was sleeping in my car. I had nothing. And a man I had never met before, a stranger at a gas station, stopped me and said, 'Son, God's got a plan bigger than your pain.' I held on to that for 8 years. I am still holding on to it." He paused. "Lily is holding on to her father's heartbeat. That is the same thing, different form, same faith." He stopped. "And I am not going to let a piece of paper from an insurance company be the thing that decides whether that heartbeat keeps going." Both families received the $20,000 prize. The competing family, the Nakamura family from Portland, had not moved from their positions for the entire preceding exchange. Keiko Nakamura, the family's mother, walked across the stage to Abina and said only, "He's lucky. He's so lucky to have her." She meant Lily. Abina knew she meant Lily. When the episode aired 7 weeks later, the clip of Lily saying his heartbeat, because it's still there, had been viewed more than 450 million times. It was the most shared clip in Family Feud history. Pediatric cardiologists shared it with their colleagues. Grief counselors assigned it in sessions. A professor of childhood development at Stanford wrote a paper about the clip and the particular form of wisdom found in children who grow up adjacent to serious illness. 3 months after the taping, Emmanuel's treatment review had been completed by a specialist at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston. A new protocol was recommended. Steve Harvey's personal commitment had covered 100% of the costs. Emmanuel Osai's scan 6 months after beginning the new protocol showed what his oncologist called a meaningful and measurable reduction in disease progression. A year after the taping, Steve Harvey launched the Lily Osai Heartbeat Fund, its motto taken directly from the 4-year-old's words, "Because it's still there." The fund supported families navigating leukemia treatment who faced insurance denials. In its first year, the fund covered treatment gaps for over 940 families. Lily, now 5, was asked if she wanted to make a drawing for the fund's website. She drew a heart. Then she drew an ear pressed against it. Then she drew a small figure beside a large figure, both smiling. She signed it in large, careful letters, Lily. Today, Emmanuel Osei wakes up every morning to the weight of his daughter's ear against his chest. He has learned to lie very still so she can listen properly. He stares at the ceiling. He feels her hand on his ribs, and he thinks, she is right. It is still there. A 4-year-old girl in a purple dress who pressed her ear to a chest and listened for the thing that told her the world was still intact. She did not know she was wise. She only knew she needed to hear that sound, and that is exactly why the wisdom was real. If Lily and Emmanuel's story moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the smallest acts of love are often the largest ones. Have you ever watched a child carry something with a grace that an adult couldn't manage? Let us know in the comments, and ring that notification bell for more stories that remind us what love looks like in its purest form.